Oh my goodness, do I have a show for you all today? We are going to get into one of the most entertaining divisions in the NFL. Not entertaining because of Taylor Swift or her annoying, obnoxious fan base, but because we are going to talk about the NFL champions from last year, the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, in due time. Let's not forget about the other three teams in the division, the Los Angeles Chargers, Las Vegas Raiders, and Denver Broncos, who also have great storylines coming into the 2024 season. The Chargers have a new head coach with the last name of Harbaugh. The Broncos might finally have their quarterback of the future. And the Raiders, well, they should be interesting too. Football fans have had our first taste of the 2024 season with the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears playing last night. And I'm sure that we are just salivating for more like Pavlov's dog. But the podcast is long enough already. So let's get into it, shall we? My name is Jeff D, and I am your host and football aficionado. And just to make sure that we never miss an episode, just to make sure that you never miss any information, let's keep liking, sharing, following, and I promise to keep giving you more entertainment yet insightful information on the NFL, every single team, all throughout the year. Let's talk some football. The first team in the AFC West that I'm going to talk about today is the Denver Broncos. Why? Because I want to torture Chiefs fans just a little bit, and because the Broncos come first alphabetically. Denver finished last year 8-9 and finished tied for second in the division with the Raiders. I said that the Broncos were going to go 4-13 because I felt, and I still feel, that Sean Payton is overrated as a head coach, and their running game was questionable at best. I thought both the Chiefs and the Chargers were going to sweep them, and instead, they actually swept the Chargers, and then they split with the Chiefs. They still managed to get swept by the Raiders, though. The Broncos were tied for the 19th toughest schedule along with the Raiders, who coincidentally finished with the same record as the Broncos. Last year, they faced opponents with a combined winning percentage of .488. Last year, Denver had Russell Wilson at quarterback, who wasn't as terrible as what everybody makes him out to be. He wasn't that bad. In 15 games, because the Broncos benched Wilson at the end of the year so that they wouldn't have to potentially pay him more money.
You stay classy.
Russell passed for 3,070 yards, which was good for 19th in the NFL, completing 66.4% of his passes, which was 12th, for 26 touchdowns, which was 9th, and only 8 interceptions for a passer rating of 98, which was 8th. Wilson did take 45 sacks, though, which was 4th most in the NFL, and had a quarterback rating of 50.6, which was 22nd. I would say that Russ is somewhere between a 15th to 20th ranked quarterback. Not great, but he can win you games as long as you're keeping him upright. This year, though, they have rookie quarterback Bo Nix, who they drafted 12th overall in this year's draft. And I got to tell you, he's not as bad as what people say either. Last year at Oregon, he threw for 4,508 yards, had a 77.4% completion rating with 45 passing touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions and 5 sacks taken. So what's the problem here? Because he's 24 years old? This kid is NFL ready, and it wouldn't completely surprise me if he finished in the top 2 or 3 for rookie quarterbacks this year. Make no mistake, Nix will be the starter by default because the other options are Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson, and we all saw how they played out last year. At running back, the Broncos have Javonte Williams, who is coming off an ACL, LCL, and all other kinds of knee damage from the previous year. Williams managed to run for 774 yards last year, which was 29th, but only had 3.6 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. Don't worry, he is going to be better this year, and I would consider him a sleeper in fantasy football. At wide receiver is Courtland Sutton as their number 1 option, and he caught 59 passes for 772 yards, which was 44th, but had an outstanding 10 touchdowns, which was tied for 4th in the NFL. Jerry Jeudy was the wide receiver 2, and he finished with 54 receptions for 758 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he's in Cleveland this year. Marvin Mims was a rookie last year for the Broncos and had 22 receptions for 377 yards and 1 touchdown, and will probably remain the wide receiver 3, as the Denver Broncos picked up Josh Reynolds, who was in Detroit last year and had 40 receptions, 608 yards, and 5 touchdowns as their wide receiver number 2. Denver's best tight end last year was Adam Troutman, who had 22 receptions for only 204 yards and 3 touchdowns because their starting tight end, Greg Dulcich, only played in 2 games due to a reoccurring hamstring injury. Dulcich has only played in 12 games in his first 2 years in the NFL, and that should be a sign for concern. Despite quarterback Russell Wilson being sacked so many times last year, some analysts insist that their offensive line for the Broncos wasn't the problem, but it was. The offense was flat and it couldn't sustain drives. At left tackle, they'll continue to go with 32-year-old Garrett Bolles, who had a pretty decent year last year, entering his 8th year with the Broncos after being selected 20th overall in 2017. At left guard is Ben Powers from the Ravens, who is starting his 2nd year in Denver, who did not have a solid year last year and needs to prove that he should be in the starting lineup. At center last year was Lloyd Cushenberry, who played well last year, but he is now in Tennessee. Sam Mustipher, another former Raven, is new to the Broncos front 5 this year, and he will be starting at center. And right guard Quinn Meaners, who was decent for Denver last year and will be entering his 4th year in the league. Finally, at right tackle is his 2nd year with the Broncos is Mike McClinchy, who looks like a terrible acquisition for Denver.
Crap!
Overall, the Broncos offense was 26th in total yards, 24th in passing, 18th in rushing, and 19th in points scored. Notable offensive draft picks this year are the aforementioned Bo Nix at quarterback, who the Broncos selected 12th overall from Oregon. In my first 3 mock drafts, I actually did have the Broncos doing just that and selecting Bo Nix, but in my final mock draft, I switched it up and I had him taking Brock Bowers, who fell to number 12, and Denver selecting him instead. I don't know why, outside of the fact that Denver had one of the worst tight end groups last year, but I should have known just to stick with my original gut feeling on that one. In the 4th round, the Broncos get a steal with wide receiver Troy Franklin, also from Oregon, who some analysts were flirting with as a late 1st round or 2nd round pick. With Bo Nix throwing him the ball in college last year, Franklin racked up 81 receptions for 1,383 yards and 14 touchdowns. Taking a look at the defensive side of the ball, some of Denver's top playmakers were outside linebacker Jonathan Cooper, who had 8.5 sacks, which was tied for 33rd, 8 tackles for a loss, 1 forced fumble, and an interception. Outside linebacker Nick Bonito had 8 sacks, which was tied for 37th, 13 tackles for a loss, which was good for 23rd, and a forced fumble as well. Defensive end Zach Allen had 5 sacks, 8 tackles for a loss, and a forced fumble. And safety Justin Simmons had 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and 8 passes defended. However, he is currently still a free agent in the NFL. But let's take a look at who the Broncos still have on defense. Denver runs a 3-4 defense with left defensive end Zach Allen, who I just mentioned, and right defensive end John Franklin Myers, who is new to the Broncos after spending the last 4 seasons with the New York Jets. Last year, he had 3.5 sacks and really not much else. At nose tackle is DJ Jones in his 3rd year in Denver. DJ had 2 sacks and 3 forced fumbles last year. The linebacker crew consists of outside linebackers Jonathan Cooper, who I mentioned before, and Baron Browning, who played in only 10 games last year due to a torn meniscus in his knee. Browning still managed 4.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles, however. Inside linebackers are Alex Singleton, who had 177 total tackles last year, 106 solo tackles, which was the 3rd highest in the NFL, and 2 sacks last year. And new to the Broncos is Cody Barton, who came over from Washington, where he had 121 total tackles and 1 interception. In the defensive backfield are cornerbacks Levi Wallace, who was in Pittsburgh for the last 2 years and had 2 interceptions last year, and Pat Surtain II, who the Broncos drafted 9th overall in 2021 and who had 69 tackles, 1 interception, and 12 passes defended last year. That number is tied for 23rd in the NFL. At the safeties are 3rd-year man Caden Stearns, who played in only 5 games last year due to a torn patellar tendon in his knee, and Brandon Jones, who spent the last 4 years in Miami and had 2 interceptions, 4 passes defended, and 1 forced fumble with the Dolphins last year. As a defensive unit, the Broncos were 29th in yards allowed, 22nd against the pass, 30th against the run, and 27th in points allowed. They were also tied for 12th in total takeaways, tied for 19th in interceptions, and tied for 21st in team sacks. Notable defensive draft picks for Denver last year, it was just one guy, edge Jonah Ellis from Utah, who was selected in the 3rd round at number 76. The draft grade that I give the Broncos is a B. They needed a quarterback, and they got Bo Nix. They didn't have a second round pick. They went edge in the third before getting a steal with Troy Franklin in the fourth. Strength of schedule this year, based on the win-loss record of their opponents from last year, is tied for 20th at 495. Let's go game by game to see how they will fare this year and see if we can predict more accurately where they will end this season. Denver starts off in Seattle in week 1, and I think that's going to be a loss. Pittsburgh at home in week 2 is a win. At Tampa Bay is a loss. At the New York Jets is a loss. They've got Las Vegas at home for a win. Los Angeles Chargers at home for a win. And then on Thursday Night Football, they go to New Orleans for a loss. Carolina at home is a win. At Baltimore is a loss. At Kansas City is a loss. Atlanta at home is a win. But at Las Vegas is a loss. Then they've got Cleveland at home, which I'm also going to call a loss because that's 13 games in a row without a bye. Their bye week is not until week 14. They should fare somewhere around the 5-8 record. Off the bye, they have Indianapolis at home for a win, at the Chargers for a loss, at Cincinnati for a loss. Then they finish out the season playing spoiler, Kansas City at home. I'm going to give them the win on that one as well. Over-under on the Denver Broncos this year is 5.5. And I think that they're going to do quite a bit better than that. 7-10 after going 8-9 last year. But like I said before, I think they really overachieved last year. They still have the same defensive coordinator in Vance Joseph, and they have the same offensive coordinator in Joe Lombardi. But I think they'll have some growing pains with Bo and the new acquisitions to their offensive line. The defense still seems average at best. So I think 7-10, that's a fair assessment of the Denver Broncos and what they'll do in 2024. And we go on to the next. If you know your alphabet, you know who I'm talking about next. That is the LA, not San Diego Chargers, with new head coach Jimmy Harbaugh. He's back, everyone, and you are all on notice. Unfortunately, his new offensive coordinator is Greg Roman, who used to be the offensive coordinator in Baltimore under Jimmy's brother, Johnny. What does this mean? It means they're going to run the ball a whole lot. With who, though? Other former Ravens running backs. This is going to be a crazy team this year. I could see them exploding or I could see them imploding. The Chargers have a new defensive coordinator as well, Jesse Minter, who, as far as I know, has no connections to the Ravens or John Harbaugh. However, Minter was previously the defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan, where he worked with Jim Harbaugh. As far as the Chargers go, though, they seriously underperformed last year, going 5-12 and finished last in the AFC West with the second worst overall record in the AFC. I predicted that the Chargers would go 12-5, and I did the worst in this division as far as predicting where teams were going to finish. The Chargers really just underperformed, especially after making the playoffs the year before. They took a gigantic step backwards. The strength of schedule for the Chargers last year was tied for 7th toughest, with their opponent's winning percentage being .529, which played a factor into their poor season as well. At quarterback for the Chargers is Justin Herbert, who apparently, brand new news, has to wear a boot for the next 2 weeks from plantar fasciae in his right foot.
Good Lord.
This is why you don't give one guy 20% of your cap space. Herbert played only 13 games last year due to a fractured index finger on his throwing hand. Before his early exit, though, Herbert did throw for 3,134 yards, which was 18th overall in the NFL, completing 65.1% of his passes, which was really only good for 20th, and he threw 20 touchdowns, tied for 17th. Herbert's QBR was a 64.3, which was 5th, but because he threw 7 interceptions, his passer rating was a 93.2, which was 14th. I think it's safe to say that Herbert is not a top 5 quarterback in the league, and I would go so far as to say that he's not even a top 10 quarterback either.
You're right.
For being the highest paid quarterback at one point in time this offseason in the summer when he got his new contract, he falls somewhere in the 11 to 15 range for top quarterbacks. At running back last year, they had Austin Eckler, who played in 14 games and rushed for 628 yards for an average of 3.5 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. He's moved on to Washington now, and the Chargers have brought in a pair of Ravens running backs, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Edwards had 13 rushing touchdowns, which was tied for 4th in the NFL last year, rushing 198 times for 810 yards, which was 23rd, for a 4.1 yard per carry. Now, that yard per carry might sound nice, but it's the first time in Gus's career that he ended a season under 5 yards per carry. Dobbins, on the other hand, has only played in 9 total games over the last 2 seasons due to a torn ACL and a torn Achilles. He was great in his rookie season in 2020 when he averaged 6 yards per carry and had 9 touchdowns. But unfortunately, that is the only year that he has been healthy, entering his 4th year now with the LA Chargers. At wide receiver 1 for the Chargers last year, it was now 32-year-old Keenan Allen, who had 108 receptions, which was 6th most, for 1,243 yards, which was 11th, and 7 touchdowns, which was tied for 18th. He did that in just 13 games last year due to a AC joint sprain that he had in his shoulder. He averaged 95.6 yards per game, which was 4th, but now he is playing in Chicago. This year, they'll have a combination of Joshua Palmer, who played in only 11 games last year due to a knee and a heel injury. Palmer caught 38 balls for 581 yards and 2 touchdowns. There's also Quentin Johnston, who in his rookie campaign last year, after being picked 21st overall, was super underwhelming and had 38 receptions for 431 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Chargers also picked up DJ Chark, who is going on his 4th team in 4 years. Last year, he was in Carolina, where he had 35 receptions for 525 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then finally, there is rookie Ladd McConkey from Georgia that LA took in the 2nd round at number 34 overall. And I got to tell you, all I see with this wide receiver room is a lot of number 2s and a lot of number 3s, but I don't see a true number 1 wide receiver in this group. At tight end, the Chargers had Gerald Everett last year, who had 51 receptions, which was 18th for tight ends, 411 yards, which was tied for 24th for tight ends, and 3 touchdowns. But he's in Chicago this year as well. Now they have Will Dissly, who spent the last 6 years in Seattle, and I'm sure he appreciates the move down south and getting out of Seattle. But Dissly had only 17 receptions for 172 yards and 1 touchdown, and he's never been a real solid contributor, with his best year coming in 2022, where he had 34 receptions, 349 yards, and 3 touchdowns, which is still pretty weak. The 2023 Chargers offensive line was awful last year and had plenty of struggles, including injuries and offensive linemen having to move around and play different positions throughout the year. At left tackle is Rashawn Slater, entering his 4th year after being drafted 13th overall in 2021. He was a solid pass blocker, but his run blocking left a lot to be desired, which seemed to be the case for most of the offensive linemen on this Chargers squad. At left guard is 3rd-year man Zion Johnson, who was drafted 17th overall in 2022 and was basically subpar in all facets of the game last year. At center was Will Clapp, who started 11 games for the Chargers last year, but is with the Bills this year. He was subpar as well, which is probably why the Chargers brought in Bradley Bozeman, who spent the last 2 years in Carolina. At right guard was arguably their worst offensive lineman, Jamari Sawyer, who is decent in the passing game, but terrible in run blocking. And at right tackle was Trey Pipkins. But this year, it'll be rookie Joe Alt, who was selected 5th overall in this year's draft from Notre Dame and who grew up in North Oaks, Minnesota, which is only about an hour away from me. So maybe I could set up an interview with him sometime in the offseason. I had Alt going to the Titans at number 7 and the Chargers selecting Malik Neighbors at number 5, but O-line was a definite need for them as well. Let the Jim Harbaugh era begin. And what I mean by that is Jim Harbaugh loves to run the ball. And if you look at the flack that J.J. McCarthy is getting in this year's draft and going to Minnesota, he didn't do a lot as a passer. They ran the ball a lot too. He's a very strategic, a very systematic type of coach. I predict with the moves that they have made, offensive line, running backs, they're going to run the ball a heck of a lot more. And now we've got this upcoming injury with Justin Herbert. I don't think that's going to change. I think that pushes it way more off into the running side of the ball instead of passing. The only other notable offensive draft pick for LA this year was the aforementioned wide receiver Ladd McConkey from Georgia in the 2nd round at number 34 overall. So they did address their need for wide receiver as well, which like I said, I thought that they were going to go maybe Malik Neighbors with that number 5 pick. They addressed the offensive line first, went wide receiver 2nd. The Chargers offense as a whole last year was 18th in total yards, 13th in passing, and 25th in rushing, which, like I said before, the offensive linemen were pretty decent at passing downs, 25th in rushing. They couldn't open up any holes. You could tell that by Eckler's numbers as well. They were also 21st in points scored. The big question this year will be, did they make enough moves on the offensive line and in the backfield to keep themselves in games this year? On the defensive side of the ball, the Chargers were able to retain all of their biggest playmakers, but is that necessarily a good thing? 33-year-old outside linebacker Khalil Mack is entering his third year with the Chargers after posting 17 sacks, which was fourth, 5 forced fumbles, which was tied for third, and 57 solo tackles. Outside linebacker Joey Bosa returns for his 9th season after being drafted 3rd overall in 2016. The last 2 years, he's only played in 14 games due to a groin tear and sprained foot. So health is going to be a question for this Bosa. Defensive end Morgan Fox is also back after 5.5 sacks last year and hasn't missed a game since 2016. Asante Samuel Jr. is entering his 4th year and had 2 picks and 13 passes defended, which was tied for 16th last year. And safety Alohi Gilman is returning for his 5th year with the team after 2 INTs, 3 forced fumbles, which was tied for 11th, and 10 passes defended in 14 games last year due to a heel injury. Taking a look at the rest of the defense, the Chargers run a 3-4-D with Morgan Fox at 1 D end and 6-year vet Poona Ford, who spent his first 5 seasons with Seattle before going to Buffalo last year and only played in 8 games due to not being a solid contributor. Honestly, that's the big question mark with him. At nose tackle is 3rd-year man Otito Ogbunia, who has only been able to play 15 games in the first 2 years with the Chargers due to a ruptured patellar tendon. At the outside linebackers are Bosa and Mack, and at inside linebackers are rookie Junior Colson, who was the Lot Impact Player of the Year in 2023 last year, and returning to the Chargers after playing with them from 2015 through 2020 is Denzel Perriman, who came back after 1 year with the Texans, where he only played 12 games and will be 32 this December. Cornerbacks are Samuel Jr. and newcomer Christian Fulton, who spent his first 4 years with Tennessee, who only played 11 games last year, 11 games the year before that, 6 games in 2020. He is the very definition of the inability to play a whole season due to injury. The safeties are Alohi Gilman and Derwin James Jr. entering his 6th year with the Chargers after being drafted 17th overall in 2018. Last year, he had 86 solo tackles, which was tied for 10th, 1 pick, and 7 passes defended. The defense as a whole last year finished 28th in total yards allowed, 30th in passing yards allowed, 17th against the rush, 24th in points allowed. They were also 21st in total takeaways, tied for 25th in interceptions, and tied for 7th in team sacks. So a lot of work to be done on that defensive front. Overall, this was one of the worst defensive units last year, and I'm surprised that they didn't make more moves in the offseason. Notable defensive players drafted this year was Junior Colson from Michigan.
Go figure it.
In the 3rd round at number 69. Justin Eboigbe from Alabama in the 4th at number 105, and then they selected 2 cornerbacks in the 5th. Draft grade that I gave the Chargers this year was a B+. Joe Alt was a solid pick and a need for the team, as well as wide receiver Ladd McConkey. I'm guessing that Jim Harbaugh knows what he's doing by picking Michigan linebacker Junior Colson, and the rest of the draft was solid as well. The strength of schedule gets much easier for the Chargers this year, as they are facing teams with a combined winning percentage of .478, which is tied for 6th easiest with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Let's take a look at the Chargers schedule this year and see if we can predict how they are going to finish. The Chargers open up at home against Las Vegas, and that's going to be a win. At Carolina is another win. At Pittsburgh is a loss, and they got KC at home in Week 4 for the win. Then they've got the bye in Week 5. Not a bad start. You've got 3-1 there, and if Justin Herbert does have to miss any time because of the new injury, that will give you a little bit of relief as well. They're at Denver, Week 6. I'm going to give them the loss there. At Arizona for a win. New Orleans at home for a loss. Cleveland at Cleveland is a loss. Tennessee at home for a win. Cincinnati at home for a win. Baltimore at home for a loss, but that should be a fun game again between the Harbaugh brothers. At Atlanta for a loss. At Kansas City for a loss. Tampa Bay at home for a win. Denver at home for a win. At New England for a win. At New England, and last game of the year at Las Vegas for a loss. Over under for the Chargers this year is 8.5. We're going to go 9-8. We've got a new head coach. We've got a new offensive coordinator. We've got a new defensive coordinator. We've got a revamped offensive line, some new running backs, and a questionable Justin Herbert. It's the Harbs and Herb show in LA for the Chargers, but I think 9-8 seems very doable for the Chargers this year. It's a step up from where they were last year when they underperformed. I don't think they're quite playoff capable yet, but they might be able to squeak in there, maybe with a couple of tiebreakers. Next up is the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs. Last year, the Chiefs finished the regular season 11-6 and won the AFC West. I said that they would finish 13-4, which just means that they weren't as good as what I thought, and probably not as good as what other people thought either. Their strength of schedule was relatively easy, facing opponents with a winning percentage of .481, which was tied for 21st with the Lions, who ended up going 12-5. At quarterback, everybody knows, is Patrick the Frog. Kermit Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes. Everyone knows him because he's the only one that you see in commercials like State Farm, Subway, T-Mobile, Hy-Vee, Head and Shoulders. So the NFL had to make sure that Mahomes and the Chiefs made and won the Super Bowl last year. Throwing the god-awful Taylor Swift in the mix just brought in a different audience, which means more money for the NFL. And they couldn't truly give two craps about football, and most of us wish that they would just go away so that we can enjoy our sport again. Mahomes is grossly overrated. Yeah, I said grossly overrated. And before you stop watching because you think I'm just a hater, let's take a look at the facts and take a look at the stats. Mahomes threw for 4,183 yards last year, which was 6th, completing 67.2% of his passes, which was 11th. 28 touchdown passes, 8th. His QBR was a 63.1, 8th. And his passer rating was a 92.6, 12th. He didn't finish in the top 5 for anything. Oh, shoot. You know what? I forgot. He did finish in the top 5 for something. Interceptions.
Booyakasha!
He had 14, which was tied for 4th in the NFL. He's a top 10 quarterback. He's not a top 2. He's not a top 3. He might not even be a top 5. If you don't believe me, go back and listen to what I just said. He didn't finish in the top 5 in more than half of his stats. At running back, Isaiah Pacheco, entering his third year with Kansas City, he had 935 rushing yards, which was 18th in the league for 4.6 yards per carry, which was tied for 9th. He had 6 runs of 20 or more yards, which was tied for 12th. He also had 7 touchdowns, which was tied for 14th in just 14 games last year, and averaged 66.8 yards per game, which was 10th. Wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs last year was Rashee Rice, but he's had some car trouble in the offseason, you might say. And who knows when he's going to actually be able to play this year, if he's going to get suspended or not. Last year, he had 79 receptions, which was tied for 24th, 938 yards, which was 32nd, 7 touchdowns, which was tied for 18th, and 654 yards after the catch, which was 3rd. Justin Watson was sadly their wide receiver number 2 last year with 27 receptions, 460 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's still there, but because of some additions to the wide receiver room, I'm sure he's going to be wide receiver 4 this year. Marquez Valdez-Scantling was their wide receiver 3, which is laughable. He had 21 receptions for 315 yards and 1 touchdown, but he's off to Buffalo now. No loss there. This year, the Chiefs added Marquise Hollywood Brown, who was in Arizona the last 2 years, and last year caught 51 balls for 574 yards and 4 touchdowns. And at wide receiver 3 will likely be rookie Xavier Worthy, who I will get into in just a bit. At tight end is the most unsufferable, douchebaggiest tight end in the NFL, Travis Kelce, who will be 35 in October and is a giant man baby. Last year, he was mostly annoying with 93 receptions, which was 3rd for tight ends, 984 yards, which was 2nd for tight ends, and 5 touchdowns, which was tied for 7th. Go slam another beer at a graduation ceremony, you worse version of Gronk. The offensive line for the Chiefs is one of the best or luckiest in the league, however you want to see it. Refs never seemed to see when they were holding or false starting, so take your pick. At left tackle was 30-year-old Donovan Smith, who is now a free agent, so I guess that makes second-year man Wanya Morris, who started just 4 games last year for the Chiefs, the man at left tackle this year. At left guard is Joe Thuney, who will be 32 years old in November and is considered one of the best pass-blocking guards in the NFL. At center is Creed Humphrey, who is the second best center behind Tyler Linderbaum in Baltimore. Humphrey is entering his 4th season with the Chiefs after being selected 63rd overall in 2021. At right guard is Trey Smith, who is entering his fourth year in the league as well. And at right tackle is the false start king, who seems to never get flagged for it, Jawan Taylor, entering his second year with the Cheats. Overall, Kansas City's offense was 9th in total yards, 6th in passing yards, 19th in rushing yards, and 15th in points scored. Does that seem like a Super Bowl caliber team to you? I don't think so. Notable offensive draft picks this year was wide receiver Xavier Worthy from the Texas Longhorns with the 28th overall pick, who I said the Chiefs would actually select, but at pick number 32, because he too is a gimmick. Worthy had the fastest 40 time at the draft, big whoop. He had 75 receptions for 1,014 yards and 5 touchdowns last year at Texas. In the second round, at pick number 63, they selected offensive tackle Kingsley Suamataia from BYU, who I thought was a really good pick and should have really gone earlier in the second round. In the fourth round, the Chiefs took tight end Jared Wiley from TCU at number 131, who I hope to God will replace Kelsey sooner than later. The Chiefs had a few playmakers on defense last year, starting with defensive tackle Chris Jones, who had 10.5 sacks, which was tied for 17th, and 13 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 23rd. Defensive end George Karlaftis, who also had 10.5 sacks with 1 forced fumble, and defensive end Charles Omenihu, who had 7 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. Defensive end Mike Dana had 6.5 sacks. Linebacker Leo Chenal had 3 sacks and 8 tackles for a loss, and cornerback L'Jarius Sneed led the team with only 2 interceptions, but also had 14 passes defended, which was tied for 9th in the NFL. But guess what? He's not on the team anymore either. He is in Tennessee now. Kansas City runs a 4-3 defense with defensive end Karlaftis, who is entering his third year in the season after being drafted 30th overall in 2022, and fifth-year man Mike Dana at the other defensive end position. Defensive tackles are Chris Jones, entering his 9th year with the Chiefs after being drafted 37th overall in 2016, and entering his 7th year at defensive tackle with the Chiefs, Derek Nadai. Outside linebackers are third-year man Leo Chenal, and on the other side is Drew Tranquil, who will be entering his 2nd year in Kansas City. He had 4.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles last year. Middle linebacker is Nick Bolton, who the Chiefs took in the 2nd round in 2021, but who only played 8 games last year because he needed surgery on his wrist. In the defensive backfield, they have cornerback Joshua Williams entering his 3rd year with the Chiefs, who had 0 interceptions and only 5 passes defended last year, and cornerback Nazeeh Johnson, who was a 7th-round draft pick last year and played like it through 11 games with 0 interceptions, 0 passes defended, and only 8 tackles. The safeties are third-year man Brian Cook, who the Chiefs took at number 62 in 2022 and had 1 interception and 2 passes defended last year, and Justin Reed, entering his 3rd year with Kansas City, having 1 INT, 1 forced fumble, 7 passes defended, and 74 solo tackles last year, which was 33rd most in the NFL. Notable defensive draft picks this year were safety Jaden Hicks from Washington State in the 4th round at pick 133, and that's pretty much it. Overall draft grade for the Chiefs is a B. I don't dislike the Worthy pick. I hope I didn't come off that way. I just don't think that they needed to give up anything to move up into the draft to snag him. Suamataia was a very good value pick late in the 2nd round for a guy that should have really gone late 30s or 40s. The tight end and safety picks in the 4th were pretty basic. The strength of schedule for the Chiefs this year is ridiculously low, with their opponents having a combined winning percentage of only .502, which is tied for 16th with the Vikings, Commanders, and Bengals. Not to mention that they were given a cake schedule right off the bat. Going over Kansas City's schedule this year, they home opener as the Super Bowl champs on Thursday Night Football against Baltimore. I think they're going to get kicked in the teeth right away, just like they did against the Lions last year, and Baltimore is going to win that game, so I am chalking them up for the loss. Next week at home, they've got 10 days to prepare for Cincinnati. They'll get the win. At Atlanta for the win. At the Los Angeles Chargers for the loss, and then they've got New Orleans at home on Monday Night Football, where they can't lose. The refs will make sure of that. They'll get the win. Going into the bye week, they are going to be 3-2. They come off the bye week. They're at San Francisco for a loss, at Las Vegas for a loss, and then back to Monday Night Football against Tampa Bay, where they're going to get another win. Denver at home is a win. At Buffalo is a loss. At Carolina is a win. Then they've got a Thursday game at home. Las Vegas, that's going to be a win. Los Angeles Chargers at home is going to be a win. Then they're at Cleveland for a win as well. Week 16 is a Saturday game, Houston at home, where they will get the win. And then they've got Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh on Thursday Night Football for another win. Last game of the year is at Denver. I think Denver is the upset. Like I mentioned before, they will get a loss there. The over-under for the Kansas City Chiefs is 11.5. I'm going slightly under at 11-6. That's where I see them again this year. They'll make the playoffs again, probably get carried by the referees in the playoffs again, yada, yada, yada. Let's move on. The next team and the last team in the AFC West is the Las Vegas Raiders, who finished last year at 8-9. I said that they would finish 9-8, so I wasn't off by that much, just one game. Their strength of schedule was a 488 last year, which was tied for 19th. They started the year with Josh McDaniels as their head coach, but gave him the boot after 8 games and a 3-5 start, and promoted Antonio Pierce as the interim head coach, later becoming the official head coach after the season was over, because he took the team to 5-4 to finish out the last 9 games of the year. The Raiders' defensive coordinator is Patrick Graham, who took over for Pierce when he moved up to the head coaching role. However, the offensive coordinator is new, and that person is Luke Getsy, who was the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears for the last 2 years. At quarterback, I think this is going to be really ugly. Aiden O'Connell took over for Jimmy Garoppolo, who started off the year very poorly. But even after Jimmy Garoppolo started off poor and Aiden O'Connell came in, he was just as unimpressive in his 11 games. O'Connell had 2,218 passing yards, which was 27th, completing 62% of his passes, which was 30th. Had 12 touchdowns and 7 interceptions for a QBR of 40.4, which was 25th, and a passer rating of 83.9, which was 27th. I'm not sure why they didn't go after a rookie quarterback. Maybe it was because the Atlanta Falcons took Penix early. Not really sure. But the Raiders also signed Gardner Minshew in the offseason after his 1 year in Indianapolis, where he threw for 3,305 yards, which was 17th, had 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, completing 62.2% of his passes, which was just a smidge above Aiden O'Connell at 29th. But he had a QBR of 59.6, which was 13th, and a passer rating of 84.6, which was 21st. Minshew is now on his 4th team in 5 years. I would not be surprised if Minshew, much like what he did in Indianapolis last year, is going to take over as the quarterback 1 after O'Connell proves that he can't handle it. At halfback, the Raiders had Josh Jacobs, who was the rushing leader in 2022. In 13 games last year, though, Jacobs managed only 805 yards, averaging 3.5 yards per game, 6 touchdowns, and 62 yards per game, which was 14th. He was their leading rusher, but then he signed with the Green Bay Packers in the offseason. Their new starting running back this year is Zamir White, who carried 104 times last year for 451 yards and 1 touchdown. So not only do you got question marks as your quarterback, now you've got a big question mark at your running back. Let's see who we got for wide receivers. Devontae Adams is still there. He'll be 32 in December. Last year, he caught 103 balls, which was tied for 10th, for 1,144 yards, which was 14th, and 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 8th. That was his second year in Las Vegas. Jacoby Myers was wide receiver number 2 last year, and he'll be that way this year again. He's back for his second year in Las Vegas as well. He had 71 receptions, which was tied for 38th, 807 receiving yards, which was 40th, and 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 8th. Wide receiver 3 was supposed to be Michael Gallup from Dallas, but he decided instead of playing in Las Vegas, he was just going to retire instead. And I think he was only 31 years old. So the likely wide receiver number 3 will be Trey Tucker, who was a rookie for the Raiders last year, and he accumulated 19 catches for 331 yards and 2 touchdowns. At tight end is yet another interesting situation. Last year, the Raiders drafted Michael Mayer at pick number 35, and he started in 14 games, but only caught 24 balls for 304 yards and 2 touchdowns. Apparently, that was enough for the Raiders to see as they drafted Brock Bowers this year at number 13 overall. So are they going to play some more 2 tight end sets, or have they completely given up on Mayer after 1 season? Maybe with what their quarterback situation is, they're looking for some shorter passes, higher completion rating. That's what I would go with at this point. The Raiders' offensive line was arguably a top 10 defense last year. At left tackle is Colton Miller, who was drafted by the Raiders at 15th overall in 2018. Left guard Dylan Parham is back for his third year with the team after being selected in the third round in 2022. And center is Andrew James, entering his sixth season with the Raiders. Right guard last year was Greg Van Roten, who is 34 years old now and playing with the Giants this season. This year will be rookie Jackson Powers Johnson, who the Raiders drafted with the 44th overall pick this year. And at left tackle this year is going to be Thayer Munford Jr., who will be entering his third year with the team. Last year, Las Vegas, their starting right tackle was Jermaine Illuminor, who is also now with the New York Giants. Overall, the Raiders were 27th in total yards, 23rd in passing yards, 30th in rushing, and 23rd in points scored. Notable offensive draft picks: tight end Brock Bowers from Georgia, who they took at 13th overall. I had Bowers going 12th, and then the Raiders going offensive line at number 13 in just about all of my drafts. But they addressed their offensive line in round 2 with pick number 44 with Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, who should have gone late first round. So this was a great pick. They also drafted offensive tackle Delmar Glaze from Maryland in the third round with pick number 77. Going to the defensive side of the ball, let's take a look at some of the playmakers that the Raiders had last year. Their biggest name is obviously defensive end Max Crosby, who had 14 and a half sacks, which was 6th in the NFL, 23 tackles for a loss, which was tied for first with Danielle Hunter, 2 passes defended, 2 forced fumbles, 55 solo tackles, and a partridge in a pear tree. This guy could do it all. They also have defensive end Malcolm Kuntz. He had 8 sacks, which was tied for 37, 9 tackles for a loss, and 3 forced fumbles, which was tied for 11th. In his first year with the Raiders last year, middle linebacker Robert Spillane had 82 solo tackles, which was tied for 18th, 3.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 interceptions, which was tied for 25th, and 148 total tackles. Somebody loves being in Vegas. Safety Trayvon Morig has 3 interceptions last year, which was tied for 25th, 8 passes defended, and 65 solo tackles. And defensive tackle Adam Butler had 5 sacks and 8 tackles for a loss. Let's take a look at the rest of the defense, though, and see what we've got. The Raiders run a 4-3 defense with Crosby at left defensive end and Kuntz on the right. Defensive tackles are newcomer Christian Wilkins, who spent the last 5 years in Miami and had 9 sacks, which was tied for 28th, 10 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 47th, and 1 forced fumble. And defensive tackle John Jenkins, who turned 35 this July and had 1 sack in his first year with the Raiders last year. Outside linebackers are Divine Diablo.
It's like Spanish for like a fighting chicken.
Who is entering his 4th year with Las Vegas and had 65 solo tackles, which was tied for 55th, 106 total tackles and 1 sack. And outside linebacker Luke Masterson, entering his 3rd year with the Raiders, only having 27 tackles last year and 2 forced fumbles. At middle linebacker is Spillane, who I mentioned just a little bit ago. And in the defensive backfield are cornerbacks Jack Jones, who only played 7 games with the Raiders after starting with the Patriots in 2023. He had 2 interceptions and 5 passes defended total last year. At the other corner is Nate Hobbs, entering his 4th year with Las Vegas, had 1 interception, 1 forced fumble, and 7 passes defended. The safeties are Trayvon Moring, who I mentioned before, and Marcus Epps, who was in his first year with Las Vegas last year after 4 years with the Eagles. He had 0 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and only 3 passes defended. Overall, the Raiders D finished 15th in total yards allowed, 12th in passing yards allowed, 21st against the rush, and 9th in points allowed. Las Vegas was also 19th in total takeaways, 17th in interceptions, and 14th in team sacks. Notable draft picks this year on defense are Dekamarion Richardson, that's a mouthful, from Mississippi State in the 4th round at pick number 112. The Raiders had to go mostly offense this year because of all the question marks with their key playmakers on the offensive side of the ball, which we've already covered. Overall draft grade for Las Vegas this year is a B-. I can't for the love of me understand the Brock Bowers pick when they just drafted Mayer early in the draft in 2023. Is it just because that they know their quarterback situation is awful this year? I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. They got lucky with the Powers Johnson pick, but kudos for seeing him still being on the board at pick number 44. They needed to address their run defense, but they didn't at all. Outside of signing Christian Wilkins from Miami, That's all that they really did. The strength of schedule for Las Vegas this year is harsh. They are facing opponents that finished with a 512 winning percentage last year, which is tied for 8th most difficult with Jacksonville and New England. Let's take a look at their schedule this year, though, and predict where we think that they will finish. The Las Vegas Raiders open the season at the Chargers, and that's going to be a loss. Then they're at Baltimore. That's going to be a loss. Carolina at home is a win. Cleveland at home is a win. At Denver is going to be a loss. Pittsburgh at home, I'm going to give them the win there. At the Rams, loss. Kansas City at home, win. At Cincinnati, loss. So at the bye week in week 10, we're looking at 4-5. Not too shabby so far. They open up the second part of their season at Miami with a loss. Denver at home for a win. At Kansas City, Thursday Night Football is a loss. At Tampa Bay is a loss. Monday Night Football, Atlanta at home, we'll give them the win there. Jacksonville at home, I think they're going to drop that one. At New Orleans for a loss. And then the last game of the year is the Los Angeles Chargers at home. We're going to give them a win. The over-under on the Raiders this year is 6.5. I got them at 7-10. So we're kind of right there. It's not all bad with all things considered, with an unproven quarterback situation, an unproven running back situation, and 2 new pieces to the offensive line. Needless to say, the AFC West doesn't look that different from last year. Boring. Hopefully the Chargers, Broncos, or Raiders will be able to shake things up, dethrone the Chiefs as the champs of the AFC West, and make it a little bit more exciting. As for me, I hope that you all enjoyed this episode, and as always, please like, share, comment, subscribe. I am also on Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify, and my site, www.downfieldread.com. Follow on everything so that you don't miss a thing. Thank you for taking this downfield read with me, and until next time, I'm Jeff D. Have a good one, everyone.